Hello, welcome to PSR, People Speaking Rail. I'm your host, Mike Baudendistel. I just want to check with production that you can hear me because I didn't hear that intro going in. Okay, great. So uh, here, talking about rail this afternoon. So this is PSR, People Speaking Rail, and going to interview Jake Hoffman, Chief Technology Officer of Gnosis, in a minute. And before I do that, I'm going to walk you through a few articles on FreightWaves.com. Sort of the first one I'd like to bring up here, written by John Kingston, just published today. And so John Kingston went up to, I guess he lives in New York, but there's a big conference in New York, the rail industry, every November called Rail Trends. That's with Tony Hatch is the one that hosts that. He's an independent rail analyst. I've been to this conference a few times. And Tony does a great job of bringing in just really a lot of the top names in the rail industry, a lot of Class One, rail executives. There's always representation from unions, always representations from the U.S. Surface Transportation Board, which economically regulates the railroads. And because John Kingston goes to this conference every year, he really spends a lot of time sort of focusing in on sort of what's changed from the previous year, and that gives you some thoughts in terms of what people in the industry are thinking about, sort of what's changed, and kind of encouraging. I mean, he said that the sort of the theme was that there's some green shoots in the what he called beleaguered sector, and I think a lot of those green shoots were related to rail service. One of the big themes I've heard on this show from interviewing various shippers, various interest groups, is that rail service really has improved. And I think that was one of the themes that John took away as well, and that seems to be translating into improved intermodal volume. Have a sonar chart to that effect, and actually shows that the fourth quarter, they see the white line is 2023, and quarter to date, starting in October, the domestic loaded containerized volume up 4.5%. And so that's actually a little better than what we've seen on the highway. And so, freight traffic, had a fairly good October. It's been a little bit muted in November. I think that's true in the rail sector as well. It seems like the rail sector in October took back a little bit of share they had lost from the highway. Kingston's article talks about that. Some of the quotes that people had at the conference was that rail intermodal lost 1.4 million loads since 2007, which translates into 3.5 billion in revenue. A lot of the executives were touting improved rail service, like Keith Creel, CEO of Canadian Pacific, Kansas City Southern, talking about service between Chicago and Mexico 4 days. So that's going to be competitive with the highway. We think that would take at least 3 days on the highway. And even Chuck Baker of Shortline Railroad and Adrian Bailey of Oliver Wyman talked about how rail service has improved. A lot of those people actually had Chuck Baker on this show not too long ago, and they really do tell it like it is when rail service is poor. So I thought those things were good. There's a lot of focus on safety as well. CSX talking about how the East Palestine, Ohio derailment on Norfolk Southern really is an issue for the whole industry, not just for Norfolk Southern. Also, John Kingston also wrote an article the previous business day or two on from takeaways from the conference, and one of the big panelists always is from the Surface Transportation Board this year. Marty Oberman was at the conference. Marty Oberman is the current chairman of the Surface Transportation Board, and he's always very outspoken, and at the conference was no exception. And even though he did talk about a number of positive developments, like some of the railroads collaborations, we've seen announcements of railroads collaborating for longer intermodal lengths of haul, really extending the reach of the railroads. He was critical of Jim Vena's first few moves. Jim Vena was recently appointed CEO of Union Pacific. He had a long tenure at Canadian National Railway under Hunter Harrison, so is very much, I think, a proponent, at least the perception is a proponent of precision scheduled railroading, having an efficient railway operation. And Oberman criticized some of the things like the layoffs in terms of maintenance of way workers, sort of reducing the capital envelope for maintenance. Union Pacific says, well, their president Beth Whited was there, and she said that really they haven't been delaying capital investment. They said they're still going to spend $3.7 billion on capital investment, significant portion of that allocated to maintenance. They do say it's hard to staff in certain places like North Platte, Nebraska, where they have a big, yard operation. So I would encourage you to read through that article, and would also encourage you to read one of Joanna Marsh's articles I'm going to highlight here. It was published about a week ago, but I think these comments are still very relevant. So the Surface Transportation Board gets an earful on proposed rule for reciprocal switching. So I've often had various shipper groups on this show, or various various other constituencies in the rail industry. I've asked them sort of what they want the STB to focus on. And the shippers always seem to say reciprocal switching, which is a way to enhance railway competition by mandating that another competing railroad could quote something, and for an interchange point, so there's a second alternative for a captive shipper. Now, what the shippers say about the current proposed rule, not surprisingly, they said it doesn't go far enough, because the proposed rule only addresses reciprocal switching when there's a service failure. They want it to go beyond that and say, well, the service was okay, quoted an unreasonable rate. That's not in the current proposal. And then they say the service has to be poor for 12 weeks, which is extended period of time. Shippers would like it to have more immediate correction. The rails say, well, the definitions for rail service aren't exactly clear. They're going to have to invest more money in order to be able to provide that data. And then the unions, interestingly, I think maybe what was incremental to me is the unions say that they really would prefer the STB focus in on the common carrier obligation rather than reciprocal switching. And so this is, companies can continue to submit comments up until December 6th. And you do have to wonder, with Marty Oberman, chairman of the Surface Transportation Board, departing. He said he's not going to seek another term, although he is going to stay on for a few months after his term ends at the end of this year. If that, makes any less of a push to enhance railway competition, he has been very, tough on the railroads regarding service. So I encourage you to read all those articles, all really well done. And with that, I want to bring on today's guest, which is Jake Hoffman, Chief Technology Officer of Gnosis Freight. There you are. Good to see you, Jake.
Good to see you, Mike. Good to be here.
Yeah, so I saw some of your colleagues at F3 a couple of weeks ago, and they were telling me a little bit about Gnosis, and I was pretty intrigued by the concept of being able to really track these containers, and want to just hear from you. Maybe you can just give us a little bit of an overview of Gnosis.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. By the way, super jealous I wasn't at F3 this year. Heard it was an incredible time. Definitely going to make it there next year. So Gnosis, we are a software company in the space of visibility. And visibility for us, we've nailed down into what we call container lifecycle management, which is everything around the move of a container. And for the most part, our customers are the international containers, so international freight, anything moving on a vessel, and then anything moving inland on the rail. A lot of the things that you're an expert at on that rail move. We started just as a software provider, just aggregating EDI data, API data from different people in the supply chain, and then servicing that to our customers, writing automation on top of it, delivery orders, trying to manage demurrage and detention. We did that for a couple of years, and then got to the point where we were relying on the data so much and kept having some issues with providers and different things, where we just decided to go build our own data model. There wasn't one place we could go where we felt super confident in the tracking data that we were going to get the most up-to-date discharge date, last free day, the rail milestones, and all those things that come with it. So we went and developed our own data model, did that a couple of years ago, and that's definitely been the fastest growing and most important part of our business, because if the data is not good, all the things you try to do in the software are kind of a moot point at that, right? If you don't have good data to drive sending a delivery order or telling somebody when the last free day is, or when a container is available to be picked up at an ocean terminal or a rail terminal, you're sending an email to something that isn't true. So that's what we've focused on, and we continue to focus on.
Yeah, what strikes me about what's challenging about that whole process is that when you're looking at various pieces of data, it seems like you're taking them from a lot of different sources and trying to put them together and making sure because the various pieces of data don't talk to each other, right? The bill of lading doesn't necessarily talk to what the railroad is doing on their end. And so how do you manage those things?
That's right, and it's pretty complicated. Continues to be complicated, and you can't just query the same bill of lading with every single source, right? And so what we do is we at Gnosis, the way we've tried to do it is we like kind of identify what those different query parameters are, and we frame everything up from the lens of what an ocean move, whether there's a rail leg included in there or not, what that entire frame looks like. And then to your point, the ocean bill of lading may not match up with what the rail carrier sees, but the equipment number does. So a container number,
Mhm.
you strip off the check digit, that's what the rail carriers use to track containers. And so we have kind of this giant skeleton, so to speak, of what a container's journey should look like. And then there's different queries out of that that go and get data from different sources and pipe them all into the same standardized container model, right? Whether it's the rail carrier, ocean terminal, satellite data where you can see where the vessel is. There's all those different places we go look for data and then standardize it, enrich it, and do a lot of different things to just show our customer that one, essentially a row in Excel that's like, hey, this is all the things that have happened to this container over its journey.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, so you're really bringing together a lot of different things into one. And so what are the biggest pain points you hear from customers in terms of not having visibility? Is there any sort of portion of the move that they're kind of blind to?
Sure. I mean, for a while, it has been that rail piece. For an ocean move, joining that data for, say a container coming into Los Angeles and getting on BNSF or UP or, going across the United States, that has been somewhat of a black box whenever it leaves the terminal and on the West Coast and then maybe until it gets to Chicago or gets to Memphis or wherever it's going inland. I mean, that's where the rail carriers have been servicing that for a while, actually being the mover of the container. But maybe there wasn't as much granularity in the data that they shared with the ocean carrier or whatever it was. And then the subsequent third party of this transaction, the actual customer getting the container at the end of the road, didn't have any additional visibility into where that container was. And so that's where other people have done it. We feel like we were one of the first movers in going directly to the rail carriers, joining it with that data that we get from the ocean carrier, normalizing that data. What freight station accounting code is this container at? What's the
Mhm.
normalizing the latitude and longitude, showing it to our customer on a map so that they can actually visualize what's really happening with their shipments. And then when you get that level of granularity with the data and the actual location and things as it's going along, you can make predictions. You can say, hey, it's 40% of the way there, and we've seen transit times take X amount of days, and you can put in speed and congestion at the ocean terminals and at the rail terminals where it's going to give your customers better predictions about when they can expect containers to be available. And that's something that we got a lot of positive feedback on in the past couple of years as we continue to roll that out to new customers.
Mhm. Yeah, what I hear a lot is that a shipper will know what vessel it's on if they're importing goods, and but they don't know is, let's say it goes to Port of LA and Long Beach, how long the container is going to be sitting at Port of LA and Long Beach before it's on the train, and they don't know if that's going to be a day or 5 days or 8 days. That's where they sort of lack their visibility. So it's easy to see how this really helps them get an idea of when you're ultimately going to need drayage capacity. You talk a lot on your website about reducing demurrage and detention costs. Can you talk a little bit about how you're able to help your clients reduce those costs?
Sure. Yeah. And I know we talked a little bit offline about the savings with doing that. Sometimes the numbers can seem kind of crazy, but really it's the large shippers, in the US or elsewhere. The US is, the highest charging ports, like 4 of the 5 most expensive ports for demurrage are in the United States. And so that's why these bills the past couple of years have been so high. But when you have these large enterprise shippers that are moving thousands of containers a month, the only way that they had previously to aggregate that, understand it, and identify those exceptions is to either rely on a third party, so to rely on a drayage provider, a freight forwarder, or somebody to do that for them, or to take in data from all these different reports and spreadsheets from ocean carriers, from freight forwarders, whoever is getting this data and giving it to them. But then there's an entire team at some of these shippers that's responsible for putting all these reports together, writing VLOOKUPs that take, hey, the discharge date is this, and that means we have 4 days, the last free day, whatever. So that the time they get all these reports together, they could have the most complex Excel sheet in the world with all these different macros and everything. But then the second that they do that and they start creating this report, all the data is old. A container could have
Mhm.
discharged, it could have been available, whatever it is. And so to take all that data, make it live, and then automate like we do, some of those notifications for when things are available, when last free day is approaching, and those things, to do it all proactively instead of having to do that aggregation of something on the back end, services or surfaces, not services, surfaces the exceptions earlier as opposed to later, and allows people to take action as opposed to just kind of auditing after it's already happened. I mean, it's crazy that doing that proactively can result in those kind of savings. But when a container sitting at a terminal is $350 to $500 a day, and you have thousands that are currently at risk of that happening, you don't have time to
Mhm.
waste, and that's where every second really counts in getting that stuff done as early as possible.
Mhm. Yeah, so you're saving on a couple different fronts. I mean, you're not just saving the merge and detention costs, you're saving all this time, which those people can be redeployed to do something else and fix issues instead of just searching for the issues in the first place. So yeah, that's pretty neat. Wanted to ask you. I mean, you have so much data. You must see industry trends before sort of the rest of us can see them. Things like when rail service becomes an issue, you must be the first to see it. We hear a lot from some of the biggest CPGs will say that they talk to their railroads every week, but not everyone is sort of has that stature. There may be a little less visibility, but interesting to hear any sort of industry trends you're seeing, like shifts in transit times, certain ports that are more efficient, certain routings that are more efficient. We know the Panama Canal is an issue. Anything like that, I'd be interested to hear.
Sure. So yeah, a couple points. And you mentioned the Panama Canal. Panama Canal, of course, is a lot of our customers. They see it in the news, and it's big news that the Panama Canal has drought issues, the depth of the water, and there's a big line waiting for vessels to go through there. I wanted to mention, there was that article. I guess it was about a month ago at this point, or maybe a little bit longer, about the customer that paid like $4 million to get to the front of the line at the Panama Canal when there was that long line.
Mhm.
Well, the article that was posted in multiple different places showed a picture of a container ship and said, "Hey, someone paid $4 million," but the person that actually paid $4 million was like a chemical shipper with a tanker, and so it's not the container vessels that are sitting there waiting and paying $4 million to get to the front. Most of the container vessels are on a normal schedule, a normal rotation, that they're making reservations far in advance. So that
Mhm.
there is a delay. It still can be impacted. If they get held up at a port and they're going to miss their reservation, then they can be subjected to that line. But
Mhm.
that doesn't happen as often. I learned this from Stephen Edwards, the CEO at the Port of Virginia. I was at a conference with him last week, and he was talking to a lot of people about that. So I thought it was super interesting. And then as far as delays, there still are delays. I mentioned whenever a vessel doesn't get there and has to wait in line. Had one of our data scientists, Luke Jenkins, wrote a query just to look and see, like, hey, any vessels that are going through Panama Canal, what is the average delay we're seeing? It's on the magnitude of 3 to 4 days, which
Mhm.
we've been tracking these things for a long time. And 3 to 4 days, if you ask anybody in ocean shipping, and 3 to 4 days delay, that's not that bad. It
Mhm.
happens,
Mhm.
and things get held up at the port, whatever happens. So that's one example on the Panama Canal front. On the intermodal front, the different routings you can take if you're getting a container from, I don't know, China, going through LA, going through Seattle, Tacoma, whatever it is. There's certain things that happen. We don't even proact, like we don't identify it. Our system just knows what's happening because it's monitoring as all these things are happening in real time. So the example is, for whatever reason right now, and there's, retroactively we could go look and we could say, is it because there's a labor issue at the terminal? Is it because there's congestion? Their vessels are taking longer, whatever it is. We've seen just in the past month, Seattle, Tacoma to Chicago and to these places is taking 5 to 6 days longer than Los Angeles, Long Beach to Chicago, Memphis, and those places. Now, what is the actual reasoning behind that? We can dig into it and we can figure out what these reasons are. But our system is just continuously updating because it sees all these things that are happening, and it's measuring the date of discharge of a container to when it gets on the rail that you mentioned earlier. And it's just automatically using that information to project and give our customers an idea of when they can expect that container. So there's other reasons, and you can analyze it and work and do those things, but we try to let the system kind of work that out on its own.
Yeah, and you really have to know what's happening kind of in real time in order to make a routing decision to not get caught up in some kind of congestion. And in some ways, it almost doesn't really matter why there's congestion. I mean, whether it's there's a flood or not having the people at the yard or whatever. It's really kind of that there is an issue, and then sometimes an alternative route is better than you would think. I mean, some of that Panama Canal, like some things we've reported on is, in some cases the delays weren't as bad as the perception. So at other times it was worse than the perception. So it just seems like kind of an objective way to look at things, using your system. You mentioned on your website the sort of the booking and scheduling are unique to each company. The companies do this differently. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So that's you're mentioning scheduling, and scheduling for us for the people that are listening. Scheduling we consider, and we talk about just in general format, is the scheduling of the pickup of the container and the delivery to a warehouse or a distribution center, wherever that container is going. And so we know we kind of our product is customizable by design at the end. We know that everybody's different, and then we have made our product to adapt to that. And what I mean is, like, sometimes maybe they have a facility where the drayage carrier is sending an email and saying, "Hey, I'm going to make a delivery at 5 p.m. today." So it's actually the trucker, the person that's delivering the container, that's setting the appointment and kind of driving that. And then sometimes if it's a live unload and you got to plan labor, maybe a warehouse is the person that's doing that. And so we've kind of made our system modular from the certain aspect where you can group, like, hey, this set of customers follows this model, this set of customers follows this model. And we've seen so many different examples now where everybody does things differently, and we just continue to adapt our product to kind of encapsulate what all those different potential scenarios are. And that's just on the scheduling front. At the very beginning of the process of moving a container on the booking front, that can be, the factory, the supplier is making a booking. It could be an origin booking agent is managing that entire booking process. I mean, there's even more complexity on the front end when you're dealing with making an ocean booking with a freight forwarder, a subsequent ocean carrier, all these different people that are involved. And so we continue to adapt our product to meet all these different things. So it's not as black and white as, hey, we're Gnosis, here's our platform, good luck, this is how we do things, right? We understand that people's complex or supply chains are super complex, and we try to at least make our product encapsulate 90% of those things, and then work with our customer on the 10% that we can't do out of the box.
Yeah, really a lot going on there. It's just with lots of different pieces of data coming from different sources, companies that are very specific. I wanted to ask you also, I mean, are there any particular shipper verticals that fit into your system particularly well? I know a lot of the sort of logos you mentioned on your website tend to be industrial, automotive, a lot of tires and those companies, some retailers in there as well. But is there any sort of industry vertical that really fits well?
Yeah, I mean, we started in furniture, right? Furniture was our first kind of customer vertical that we were in. We got into that market and we understood it super well. But then, since then, that was where we started, and we understood, like, selling inventory as it's on the water. We'd be tracking, like, which couch within a container was sold as it's 8 weeks away, right? And so allowing our furniture customers to kind of prioritize then. Then we got into the automotive space and tires and things where it's what's really important is there's a date that this container has to get to a distribution center, or else it's going to shut down a production line. And so as we continue to expand to these different verticals, we gain a little bit of expertise in how their supply chains are working,
Mhm.
and then we can adapt our process accordingly. So I'd say, there's not really one that we specialize in. We continue to adapt. It was furniture, tires. We're getting into discount and retail, garments. There's all these different verticals that all have their own kind of special ways that the supply chain works. And since our platform and our engineers, every single account manager for all of our customers is an engineer. And so we take that
Mhm.
approach because they can sit there with a customer and understand that problem and apply that engineering mindset of, oh, it would be really cool if I could write an optimization algorithm that would look at these variables X, Y, and Z, and then output it for my customer, and that'd make their lives so much easier. And we do that by design because we know that every single customer supply chain is different. And we want to be able to adapt to that and provide solutions for them in that method.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You mentioned offline that you do domestic intermodal containers in addition to international intermodal containers. How are those different? Is there added complexity with domestic? Because a lot of times you would have international freight being transloaded into domestic freight, and carrier has to get the container from somewhere. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and that we, like you said, we talked about it offline a little bit. We kind of stumbled into it by accident, where we had to establish these connections to the rail carriers to understand the move at the final piece of an ocean journey. Right? It's like, hey, it's moving inland, comes to a terminal, it's going to a rail terminal. But then we realized there's this whole entire world of this intermodal domestic, container moves that we could also track because it's using the same rail terminals, the same infrastructure, and things that we're already helping our customers understand. There is a little bit of a difference in it. Getting into the technical piece of it, of course, is like for an ocean move, you know where it starts and where it ends because you have kind of this plan of an ocean move. It's coming into LA, which we know. We know that it's booked to Chicago. We know where to look for these data points. And then intermodal domestic move, we can get the data from the rail carrier itself. But if a customer just says, "Hey, this equipment's what I care about," do they care about it right now, or do they care about it when it was on the rail 14 days ago? And that's where you get into working with the rail carriers and understanding letters of authorization and who wants to see what. And then we can frame it up on our side with like, hey, we can get a bill of lading or a way bill or whatever to make sure that we understand what it looks like. And so there is more complexity in just data cleanliness and understanding what people want to see. But it is great working with the rail carriers. They've been fantastic with their APIs and their data connectivity to work with us on that. It's been great, and it's a cool thing for us to get into and use our connections to provide value to our customers in different ways.
Great. And for those who want to learn more and sort of see how you can add value to their supply chains, how can people reach out to you, Jake, and Gnosis Freight?
Sure. Yeah, you can add me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time now. Just Jake Hoffman. You can search me at Gnosis Freight on there. Twitter, Jake_Hoffman19 is my Twitter. And gnosisfreight.com is our website. You can go submit a form on there, learn about all the stuff that Mike and myself have been talking about. But yeah, anybody, if you have any questions or anything, would love to talk about this stuff. Thanks for having me on. It's been great. I love having these conversations and getting deep into the weeds of all the tech of it.
Yeah, you bet. Hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving.